10 years ago, I released my first review of Bionicle the game. And you know, considering it was my first, I'm still pretty proud of it. I've definitely made videos since that I think less of. Most of the Bionicle videos afterwards, for example, I think I tried too hard stuffing too much into one video and didn't give the proper time to either play or formulate my opinions on the games. For the Flash games, the problem was mitigated by their very nature of being short, simple games for the most part, but the handheld games? So I was watching Flandrew's video on Bionicle the game, and he gave a bit of time to the GBA version. I thought, that game looks interesting, I'd like to see a video really delving into it, before realizing that that was supposed to be me. I blame emulation, just downloading the file doesn't give the game the proper respect, and I thought a couple minutes was enough. Well, no more. I've got the cartridge, it's time to atone. Since The Legend of Madanui got cancelled, 2003 was the first time we got a big Bionicle game, after prior efforts were limited to just Flash and handheld games. So if anything, this GBA version is par for the course. After Quest for the Toa and Matoran Adventures, this is just another annual game. The console version was developed by Argonaut Games, but the handheld version was done by Mobius Games. I was all set to say that they've since shut down like nearly every developer that touched Bionicle, but actually, no. You may not be familiar with the name since the kinds of games attached to it include Alfred Chicken for the PS1 and Barbie Horse Adventures Wild Horse Rescue. But they also developed the GBA port of Max Payne, and now that I know that, it kinda fits. I wonder if there was a beta of Max Payne that still used the Bionicle models, or vice versa, and if so, I want to see it. Anyway, Rockstar was apparently so impressed with their work on this and a high-power handheld engine that happened to align well with the upcoming PSP, that they purchased Mobius outright and converted them to Rockstar Leeds, who went on to develop Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories, Vice City Stories, and Chinatown Wars, and then acted as a support studio for the rest of Rockstar's future stuff. I don't know if any of these people are still with the company, but if they are, they're working on GTA 6 now. Obviously. So before we get started, I'll give you the first and most important tip. On the main menu, LLRL select start A for the cheat menu. Mini-Me just makes everybody small, it's just there for a goof, doesn't mean anything. Weak enemies makes every enemy die in one shot. It doesn't affect bosses, and since enemies are really just obstacles that can take a lot of punishment and respawn every time the room loads, yeah, I recommend it. And then there's infinite lives. Turn this on. I cannot overstate this. Especially on your first time, you are going to die a lot in ways that don't feel fair. Legitimately, my learning that this cheat existed was the biggest push to being willing to buy a physical cart and play it there. Now that the cheats are activated, let's start this game. The story is, the Toa are good and Makuta is bad, they're a Bow-Rock. Move over, Ghost Trick, a new contender for best story in a game is in town. And once you've finished absorbing all that, we're at the character select screen. Hey, would you look at that, all 6 of the Toa Mata. That is more than the console version can claim, so legitimate points for that. That's always been weird to me. I get time crunch, but Liwa stage was the most prominently shown in early trailers, like it was the furthest along, yet it never got finished? Maybe that's why the character select starts on Liwa here, but starting on the right is weird, so we'll go left and pick Tahu. So this is an isometric platformer that uses 3D models for all the characters, and for the GBA, it looks pretty good. I think the simple designs of the toys lend themselves well to a low poly construction, and in all but the busiest rooms, it runs well. The environments are nicely detailed, except for... well, we'll get into that later. And the music is very catchy, the mystical sound fits Bionicle well, and I always get the character selects theme stuck in my head whenever I play this game. It's the reason I used it for the opening montage in the first handheld Bionicle games video. The aim of the level is to find 8 Matoran, whereupon you get a key to fight the boss. The game likes to fancy itself a puzzle platformer, but in reality, all that means is hitting buttons and switches to make floating platforms move so you can get to a ledge with a Matoran on it. Each stage also has 1 or 2 cages that are unlocked by a certain number of these light stones scattered about, which contain between 2 to 4 Matoran, which can be a big help. Though if you don't have enough, they don't tell you what the quota is, so expect to be disappointed when it's either far higher or far lower than anticipated. We should also get a feel for the controls. He's got a double jump, a projectile attack, and a lock-on. Tahu even has the special ability to smash rocks, because yeah, that's what I think of when I think of Tahu. Maybe he moves a little bit slow, but for the most part things feel fine. Except for the biggest upfront problem the game has, the movement. Making an isometric game on a D-pad means making some tough decisions when you've only got 4 directions to work with, and their solution was to tilt the axis 45 degrees clockwise. Pressing up and moving northeast just feels extremely off-putting. No joke, first time playing, I honestly recommend holding the controller crooked so it lines up a bit better. I made the same comparison the first time, but it's really the best one I've got. Sonic 3D Blast. This isn't a great game, but it's not a bad one either, and the movement just feels right. Regardless of the camera angle, up is up and down is down. It makes it very intuitive before the rest of the game's problems start coming to light. Though, with that said, enough time has opened my eyes to the fact that this game was designed around its controls. Every jump is done on a diagonal, i.e. by pressing a cardinal direction. It would feel awkward, but you might be able to play this game without any diagonal inputs. There's definitely still a period of adjustment when first starting out, but this realization alone did a lot to make traversal easier. Tahu stage is overall pretty good as a first stage. The final gate is right near the entrance, so it's easy to remember where it is. It doesn't have any gimmicks, it's fairly easy to navigate because it goes in a circle, and it has enough of the time challenges that will permeate the rest of the game to get a feel for them. There is a lot of lava ground, which drains health fast, so stay on your toes, but it's a suitable sampler for what the rest of the game has to offer. Once you collect all the necessary number of Matoran, head back to the gate to enter for a fight against Tarnok. Just one. The entire thread of the Bow-Rock was their numbers, even the console game's equivalent fight did have a couple at once. Were we not still the Toamata, I would say it would make more sense for this to be the Bow-Rock Call. This guy's got a gimmick that he blocks all frontal attacks, but he spins around too fast to circle strafe, so the best method I've found is to jump over him, bait his shield, and then hit him round the back. I tip my hat to the staff at Mobius for realizing a manual lock-on was a must. This fight would not work without that. Next comes Kopaka. The overall structure is the same, and Kopaka has the same abilities as his brother. Well, mostly. He doesn't have a double jump, and spoiler, he's the only Toa that doesn't? That doesn't make sense to me. A double jump is such a fundamental movement tool, you either need to give it to everybody or be more selective about who gets it. Like, Liwa having one makes perfect sense. Gali having one while underwater would work, but that's about as far as I can stretch it. He's also only one of 2 characters that doesn't get a special skill tied to the R button, even if most of them are very lackluster. Somebody must have hated Kopaka. The Toa of Ice can't even walk on icy terrain without slipping. The one thing he gets is these cube outlines that he can shoot to make ice block platforms, but man are they small. Not only does this make them difficult to even lock onto, but in my opinion demonstrates the real biggest problem with this game. See, this is a GBA game. The environments are all made in 2D in a way to simulate 3D. Because everything is at a fixed angle with no environmental shadows, it's impossible to judge depth. It's shockingly common to try and jump for something, only to discover the destination was nowhere near where you thought it was and fall to your death. It makes navigating all but the most rudimentary platforming challenges unbelievably frustrating. However, again, more time did clue me in on the design around this. Yes, the developers did actually account for this. Most jumps over dangerous terrain have some sort of marker on the ground to indicate the exact plane you should be jumping on, and moving platforms move on these rails to give an indication through their route in 3D space. They really wanted this game to stand out from the top-down adventure and side-scrolling platformer that came before, and by Modanui, they did everything in their power to make it fit. But that really only takes you so far. Not only are those markers not always there, but even relying on them feels counterintuitive. I think they just made a mistake going with this genre on this hardware, but there wasn't enough time to do something else. It's easily the most difficult part of the game, and exactly why I so strongly recommend Infinite Lives. You're going to die a lot jumping for something that isn't there. Or at least taking heavy damage, because guess what, this game has fall damage. Also, I swear there's at least one part of this stage where there's no way back up, which thankfully isn't a dead game because there's multiple teleport spots in each stage, but now it becomes a matter of find a shrine to teleport to a spot above and walk back there, compared to walk back up. Last comes our fight with Korok, which is exactly the same as Tanakh. Yeah, I'm not kidding. And spoiler alert, every Borok fight is 100% identical. I can't prove it, but I think they all use the same AI routine. If nothing else, it does demonstrate that on their own, the Borok are not interesting. Which I think is canon? I don't know, it's been a long time. I've got a very limited memory of anything that isn't in the movies. Next comes Gali. Her special power is a wall jump, which not only doesn't need to be underwater, there aren't any places underwater where it would come in handy. If I'm stretching, I can call it kinda like a frog, but that's pretty out there. I guess they figured her usual mask power of water breathing was too boring, which, fair, but it also feels like they programmed in a wall jump and then had to give it to a random Toa. With the right graphics, I could see it being Kopaka's power, freezing himself to the wall for each jump. Anyway, not only does this mean more vertically oriented rooms, but it doesn't come into play too often because the gap between the two walls has to be small for it to work. Thankfully, the stage limits the amount of fall damage because there's a lot less floor. Fall into the water, that's a whole other layer to the level design. It's not interconnected, they're just single rooms to find another Matoran in for the most part. It does make it a bit easier to navigate, except for needing to get to the gate by going underwater and then jumping out against a different wall as the only way into that room. They do put arrows on the wall to indicate where you can get out of the water, this would be unbearable otherwise, but only having one exit per room makes this really annoying. One missed jump and Gali goes into the drink, walking even slower back out just to find everything reset. This is also the first stage we've seen these hanging ledges, and not only is the act of jumping sideways off them far harder than it needs to be, but so is jumping on. If you are not facing it exactly, you can't grab a ledge. And then Galok. Okay, see if you can explain this. The entire point of the Borok fights is to shoot them from behind, and once they're down to half health, they start rolling around, crashing into the wall. Don't you think it would make sense if the plan changed to guiding it into the wall and shooting it from behind while it's recovering? It feels like that's what was supposed to happen since it becomes difficult to get it to not roll, but even if I unload into its backside, it doesn't seem to work. Actually, that's not true. I see a little damage every once in a while, but it's far from consistent and it doesn't look like it's supposed to be happening. Like it's a glitch that's bypassing another glitch, preventing this tactic from working in the first place. Anu is next, and I actually like this level. It's a lot more focused on the puzzle side. There's very few enemies and most rooms are about pushing rocks onto elevators and switches to get platforms in place. Despite the limited pool, they do pull out some pretty neat brain teasers. But they really like to involve pushing the rocks onto the moving platforms, which are barely bigger than the rock itself. So if you don't get it as far against the edge you need it on as possible beforehand, well, that rock's somewhere you can't really get to the other side of to push, so either kill yourself or go through a door to reset everything. And really, what's the excuse for this? Does the pushing really need to be this slow? His special ability of digging is also very underutilized. Pohatu is fairly similar, which isn't unexpected, but with picking up rocks instead of pushing them. It's not as heavily focused on puzzles, but the movement is still just as sluggish. This is also more annoying because you know what happens when you throw something? You might miss. Thankfully, if a rock goes out of bounds, it respawns, but now you have to start over. And finally, we've looped back around to Lila. His special power is gliding, which not only fits the character, but it has universal application to line up your drop shadow with where you're trying to land. Only problem, it's not like Knuckles' glide where it lasts forever until he touches the ground, it's limited. It's also, say it with me, slow, so it actually doesn't get you much in terms of extra distance. Don't expect to use it to skip anything, I just use it to make sure I land where I want to go. This is also the one stage where I think the visuals fail to impress. Every other stage essentially takes place in an indoor environment, or can at least put large walls around everything. The forest doesn't really let you do that, so instead of coming up with a nice background, they just gave up and left it black. I swear, this is also the largest stage, or at least the most spaced out. And since it's also the only stage where a platform can take you to another room, which means exits that don't exist on the walls, which makes getting between each room more difficult, ironically because there's more routes. Navigating around these circular floors is also more challenging than it needs to be. To nobody's surprise, except for the devs who made this the first recommended stage, this is where you'll fall the most. That's all 6 Toamata, so now we get to see how this game handles the transformation into Toa Nuva. I've already long given up hope for the Balrog, so it all comes down to the evolution. Let's see! Ooh, I think I got chills. Like, they couldn't use a still from the commercial of them rising out of the energized protodermis? Couldn't even say the words energized protodermis to indicate there's even a reason they did transform? So now we start with the Toa Nuva. Already I was nervous because during the Mata stages, there were Matoran in places that were impossible to reach. You were even told that you weren't powerful enough yet. Obviously that wouldn't happen if you weren't going to go back in, and since I didn't find any upgrades, it has to be the Nuva form that does it. That clued me in that these are just going to be the same levels again. And that's exactly what I got. Being a Toa Nuva means that they get a drastically increased jump height when standing still, and their special skill is powered up. Selectively. And as you can see going in, there's now double the Matoran to rescue. Other than that, the stages are exactly the same. But they're not exactly the same stages because all the work you did the first time is undone when they easily could have done a Metroidvania thing and let you continue what you've started. In fact, they let you switch back to the Toamata to go back to their stages, but there's no difference except they're smaller. There's nothing to get. Why would I ever do that? So starting over again with Tahu Nuva, he can now break these more gold-colored rocks, of which there's like one. Other than that, there's not a whole lot to say about the stage itself. It's the same one with everything you'd expect to be the case when it's just bigger. Except for this one damn room. There's not a lot in it, with one row of floating platforms that lead to one timed button. But when you press a button, it's uncommon for the camera to shift to show you what it actually did. And if you fall and die, you need to hit the button again. And the only place it could do something is way down here, far enough down that you'll probably die when you fall because seeing the platform down is nearly impossible and landing on it even harder. I spent a long time here and I still don't think I ever figured out what the button did. The bosses of the second set of levels are the Rakshi, starting with Kurok. Aren't we missing something here? Honestly, I was fully expecting the Borak call, with them all being fought exactly the same way as the original Borak. And you know, I'm happy that's not the case, but Parakal was my very first Bionicle figure. I got a soft spot for the guy. Even the console game, when Gali Nuva took them all out at once, they were at least there. To give credit to the rock she fights, they are different. Each of them has a different gimmick. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter because they can all be beaten by the same strategy. Circle strafing. Take Kurok. His pattern is that he's guarding but stops to fire a shot. The shot is too slow to hit you if you're always moving, and you don't need to hit him in any specific place when he's vulnerable, so just circling him does the trick. Kopakanuva. Yeah, having the higher jump is nice, but doesn't really make up for the lack of a double jump, you know? You remember those ice cubes he could make before? Well, now he can make bigger ones! I gotta admit, aside from the higher jump, all the other upgrades are really just keys to access a new wing of the level. This just happens to be the most egregious. You know what else is egregious? When on the slippery ice, the lock-on doesn't work. No reason. The game never acknowledges it, and I thought it was a glitch. There's not even that much ice in the level for this to make a difference. Volok tries to suck you in, and you have to let him do it and then back off when he releases the shockwave. But that's it. Gallinuva's next. Because her power was already about getting to high places and half her level was underwater, this one really feels the least changed. So I'll talk about this section. I did it on the first visit too, but I didn't have a reason to mention it then. This is easily the most dangerous room in the game because it's an A to B to A to C path surrounded by instant kill spikes, and should you ever die, it's back to the beginning. It's one of the bigger rooms in the game, and because it's underwater, it's slow. And you can't skip it, you will need the Matoran in and through here. Turok is the boss, and they say he can freeze you with fear, but all that amounts to is avoiding his shots. Like anything else. Anuanuva, I already claimed this was probably my favorite stage, and nothing's really changed this time. His ability to dig through tougher earth is similarly underutilized, and I'd say it's the hardest to even tell the difference in. Of course, all the problems I mentioned during the first version are still present, and because the stage is longer, that slow pushing has a lot more time to get on my nerves. Oh, I also ran into a glitch where I managed to jump into a fence corner too close to the ceiling and got stuck, and there was nothing I could do. Have to reset the game and put in the password again. Yeah, passwords, no save battery in this one. I don't really get the password system here. I can just switch the stage select menu and it gives me a different password. Pohatu Nuva.
I wish I was dead. Hey.
See, I admit that the game gives you more Matoran than you need to clear the stage. And by that, I mean one more. So if the spot you neglected to check was a cage with more than one in there, the extra don't mean shit. And I missed it because it was in this deep underground area that you get to by getting to the top of this other room and falling down a pit. And this place is a maze that reuses the same room layout and is incredibly easy to not realize you haven't checked one single path because guess what? There's no map. And that room that leads down here has this platform way up there that you can barely see that threw me off because I thought there had to be a way to make that platform descend, or maybe there was an extra route I missed that exited up there. No, it's just meant to be a safe way back down, but it even fails at that because it's so far out of the way. Altogether, that's why this stage took me close to a fucking hour to finish. It's not even worth talking about Gurok. Finally, we got Liwanuva. It's really just more of the same annoyingly spaced out stage. It's really not even that bad. It took me half the time Pohatunuva did, but by the time you get to this point, you're wiped. Panrak got that big steppy, but the quakes don't stop you in any way, so the pattern is just circling around him and shooting when he stops. And with the Toanuva finished, it's time to take the battle to the Makuta, but who is strong enough to fight the Master of Shadows? This guy. Yeah, it was no Mask of Light movie, but the console version did at least set up the existence of Takua and the Mask of Light to the most limited degree possible, yes, but it was there. Here, not only is that not true, but they never even say the words Takua or Mask of Light. Hell, you might not even know that Takua was in the game prior to this moment. He's the guy that gives you tutorials, but you may not realize that since his dialogue portrait uses his Modanui Online game mask, while his cutscene render is the proper Mictoran design. Whatever, it's time for Takanuva to take on Makuta. I'm ready for this to be over. So you can bet my heart sank when I saw that 0 out of 16 pop up when the level starts up. It's actually a lie, there's no Matoran in this stage. Which makes me think that the game can't function without a Matoran goal, and since Takanuva is counted as a Toa Nuva, it's hard-coded to be 16. I had an idea that if there had to be rescuing, put them all in one room, but 16 would be a lot for that. But yeah, this is just one room to get used to Takanuva's moveset and then Makuta. Hey, you got solidarity, Kopaka. Takanuva can't double jump either. But he does get Liwa's glide, and in a stage with 2 rooms, I'm sure he'll get great use out of that. Well, this is it, the final battle with the Makuta. And he's a mix of the Borak and Rakshi bosses. He's got the same attack patterns as the Rakshi, just faster and more dangerous, but you have to hit him from the back. But see, his back changes colors, so you need to shoot him with the matching element, because Takanuva can swap between every other Toa's power. Now, setting aside the fact that just because he's the 7th Toa doesn't mean he's the ultimate Toa with all the powers of the rest, from a gameplay perspective, one of 2 things happened. Either somebody thought the final Toa should have this power and deliberately designed a boss around this gimmick, or somebody thought of the gimmick and forced the power on the Toa. Because aside from their color, everybody's shooting is 100% identical. This isn't a Mega Man situation where you use different weapons for different purposes, the only difference here is their color. Other than that, this is the best fight in the game, though that is a low bar to clear. He's more aggressive and deals a lot more damage, so you do have to be careful, and only having one jump makes jumping over him to bait his shield more treacherous. And thankfully, there's no scrambling with the R button for different elements. His weakness always goes in linear order before settling on light for the final hits. Though some of the colors are pretty similar, so I hope you're not colorblind. Or, since this game came out in 2003, meaning both the GBA SP and Game Boy player were less than a year old, hopefully you weren't playing on the original GBA screen that's so dark you wouldn't be able to tell the difference regardless. Takanuva scores the final hit, and apparently they fuse. Yeah, nothing in the game indicates why or how they do, and again, the console version at least did the bare minimum here, but the pictures say they did. Oh, and they used a still from the movie for Takuta Nuva, even though the intro and his 3D model used the toy design from Makuta. I love that the text in the ending is so conclusive. It reads as, "Makuta is dead and now everything is good and nothing bad will ever happen again." They got a still from the movie to use, nobody told them that 5 minutes later in that same movie they teased more to the story. Hell, with how long games take to develop, 2004's games were probably already in production by the time this printed. And that is absolutely everything Bionicle the game has to offer. The credits roll and you're back to the title screen, nothing more to see. At the very least, I would have thought that this game would pull a Mega Man X6 and tell you the code to unlock the cheat menu, but it doesn't. You're just left with an empty feeling that, yes, you did just play a game. And that game was not good. I wouldn't call the console game good, but it's not bad either. This did get all the Toa in there, though when it required using the same levels twice, maybe that was a bad sacrifice. It's somewhat ambitious, there's certainly more impressive 3D games on the GBA, but for a quick license title, they didn't have to try as hard as they did. I just think they made more trouble for themselves by trying that hard. The awkward controls, poor navigation, and lack of content just bury anything decent about it. Despite having already covered them all, I don't consider myself enough of an expert to say it for sure, but there have to be better Bionicle games on the GBA, at least enough to make this one nothing more than a curiosity. But that would require owning those other games, and I'm sorry to say that buying them is just not a priority. Oh. Maybe.